Well, good afternoon-ish.
Ish. It is afternoon-ish.
Well, just here, just kind of on the cusp of it, yeah.
That's right. You're Bob and I'm Tom.
And this is the Border Patrol Journal for the first one in February.
Yeah, and it's episode 3,
Woo.
which will be called.
Well, I think we should preface that by welcoming all our guests to the post Groundhog Day. And I think in honor of that, we should call this the Groundhog Day episodes.
It's okay. That's what it is. It's the Groundhog Day episode. And
And
you
people,
know what groundhogs do.
well, for those of you that don't particularly know this quaint custom, it's where some kind of animal, be it a rodent or a crustacean or whatever it happens to be, pops up magically and looks to see whether it sees its shadow or not, and determines whether we as human beings are going to fall to its magical display of talent and have 6 more weeks of winter, or whether spring is going to come early.
Well, I think it's pretty remarkable that a rodent has the potential for providing us information that's of any value at all.
Well, that kind of falls in with most news outlets then.
There you go. There you go. So the rodent edition of the BORDERPOL Journal, which is not to be confused with the rat edition.
Well, I think we talked a bit about pre-production. What is a rat and what is a mouse, and
Exactly.
I still haven't quite figured it out and got my head wrapped around it, but
it is a rat is something that we don't like when they're in charge of things.
true. And a mouse is something that we don't like because when they're in charge of something, they don't do anything. So
there you go. The mice that roar and the rats that run the show.
yeah.
I guess we're really being a little, what's the word, sketchy at the moment. People are going, what the hell are these two guys talking about?
Well, we decided that we'd start off with a little bit of levity, I think, and I think has to be taken into account of. And again, for some of our audience, I don't know if you really remember the movie Groundhog Day. And I think that's where you kind of goes, can we change things? Or if we do this, what would have happened? And in reality, at the end of the movie, you find out it really doesn't matter. You can change all the things you want, but Stephen King wrote about that. I think what was that 11/22/64 in his book, where he had the one guy who tried to go back and stop the Kennedy assassinations, and it didn't matter what he did, it just would not change the fact. Yeah, I sometimes get the feeling that that's what's happening in today's world.
You think we're in that kind of loop?
I almost am afraid so. Yeah.
Well, for the 2 hours we spent talking about what we should talk about today, it is Groundhog Day in a sense, because all the things we see from one week to the next is still the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah, and maybe one day things will change. I guess that's the eternal optimist in me hoping, but I think, as we also said in pre-production, it was one of those things where in the past we've always looked forward and saw the doomsday clock ticking away and the big mushroom cloud on the horizon. But just before things got too bad, somebody miraculously stood up and took charge and led us away from the abyss. But I don't know, to this point, I haven't seen anybody in the white hat kind of even in the shadows yet.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Well, it's a lot of depressing news this past week. So from that perspective, we have no I have no good news to report. And this particular week has a lot to do with border issues and the impact on people, particularly here in North America.
Very true. Yeah.
Um, we're not too optimistic about what's happening in the US at the southern border, where you have two levels of government facing off with each other on the issue of protecting the sovereignty of the collective United States versus the sovereignty of the individual states.
Hmm.
And so uh, not in my lifetime, I thought I would see something like this.
No, no. And that old saying that if you don't study history and you don't understand history, you're bound to repeat it. And I kind of hope in the case of our southern neighbors that that's not going to be a repeat of the 1860s again. And
Yeah,
well,
for
that
sorry, go ahead.
no, as to say it was such a travesty then, and it would be probably more so now.
Well, the impact on the continent is undeniable if this turns it from a political tug of war to a kinetic one, which
Mm,
some conspiracy theorists have suggested is that where we're headed. And when, as we spoke about earlier in preparation for this show, the North American continent is in deep flux here. We have so many different strains pulling in different directions politically, economically, socially, culturally,
yes,
environmentally. That if you look down on, as they say, 30,000 feet onto the United States and Canada, you basically are looking at 5 or 6 different countries. If you were to break them up into their political setups in terms of their aspirations, in terms of their cultural positions, in terms of their environmental positions. It's always been fair to say that in the Canadian experience, the province of Quebec is very different from the other provinces. But now you can say that in Canada, you have different regions now that don't share similar traits.
true. Yeah,
And in the southern neighbor has evolved into a similar kind of situation where the Midwest really doesn't have much in common in various areas with the Northeast or the Southwest.
yeah,
And conversely, the Northwest and the Southeast look at life differently and economics differently. And the border crisis has brought all these things together in a way which I don't think anybody expected 4 years ago
yeah.
to happen. Uh, so we look, it's a very grim sort of prospect that if you look, as I say, from a higher altitude down, how do you keep all these disparate groups that are emerging uh, in a union or in a confederation? And
Yeah,
there's some, I think, legitimate concern for things spinning out of control here on this.
very true. And like I think you used the analogy when we were talking before, it's like the kid in a fireworks factory playing with matches. And it's fine initially because the probability is that one match isn't going to cause a big problem. But the more matches that are lit, the more likelihood it is that there's going to be a big explosion. And again, we've talked about it before. where's the adult in the room? And that's what I guess we're looking for, is somebody to miraculously appear and take away the matches from the kid or the kids, and hopefully bring sanity back. Is that the right? Now, is it sanity, or is it calmness? Is it peace? I don't know what it is, but somebody has to stand up and do that.
Well, there doesn't seem to be, as you said earlier, anybody on the horizon. The leadership of both the Canada and the U.S. on the issue of undocumented, illegal, unauthorized, unwelcome, whatever euphemism you want to use on the migration scene, is
Mhm.
collectively the same. They have this approach of looking at the situation as unfixable. In other words, they believe, I think, in their heart of hearts, that this is good for everybody concerned, and that it is a phenomena that cannot be stopped. Of course, others
Yeah.
will tell you that the reason they do this is these are future voters for both the Washington Democrats and the Ottawa Liberals, who see this because the position policy-wise is identical. They don't remove anybody if they don't really have to, and they have open-ended policies, uh, in practical terms, even though they might state that that's not the case. Uh, so when you have a disproportional number of new entrants to the community that cannot be housed, that cannot find work, that do not integrate, that have a totally different reason for being in the country than anybody else that was brought in through a legitimate, I should say, effective migration or refugee policy, effective for both the host community as well as those who are, the migrants or the refugees themselves. This leads you into kind of a cul-de-sac that I don't know how you get out of. I mean,
Yeah.
and so when you see a federal government in the United States challenging the state of Texas and others, uh, literally up front, as to opening the border versus managing the border, because they're not managing it; they're simply wanting it to be open. And when they want more manpower, they want more manpower not to manage the border, but to process the migrants. Uh, and so, you see that there are conflicting interests here, quite extreme conflicting interests.
Yeah.
And
Very much.
yeah, so and then combine that with the disparate regionalism that is starting to evolve in North America. I don't know how you keep the folks down on the farm, so to speak, because the 25 or 26 U.S. states that are aligning with Texas on this issue. There are only 50 states in the union. You can take out Alaska and Hawaii from this particular conversation because they're not particularly affected by this. And then if you look at this from a perspective of continental North America being Canada and the U.S., because really Central America and Mexico are out of this equation from the standpoint of management. Uh, then you can see kind of a disillusion, if you will, of the systems that have served us more or less since Confederation in 1867 and 1776, going back with the United States. It could be that we're going to end up at some time in the future with 5 or 6 different administrations or countries or regions in what we now know as Canada and the US, because if there's not going to be some kind of cohesiveness to this policy of immigration, and how are you going to have cohesiveness in issues of economics, of culture, of the environment, and so on? This is a fundamental problem that they've created, which was totally unnecessary, and which, as we kind of parsed out earlier, seemed to have been dreamt up during the COVID era.
Well, that's true. You know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I don't think this was on anybody's radar.
No.
And is it because during the COVID era we were, well, not necessarily forced, might be a bit too strong a word, but we were thrown into a situation where we could all sit around and gaze at our navels and see, well, this is happening. Is this right? Is this wrong? Should this happen? Shouldn't it happen? And as a result, here we are 4 years later with a lot of people that probably are looking for answers. And I'm not sure that there's anybody that's capable of giving them one. So is that magic person going to stand up soon and take a bow and lead us all off someplace that everybody can follow and hope? You know, good God, that didn't work out too well in Georgetown, but
Yeah. No, what's frustrating is that here you have a situation where the back door of the house is left open while the owners of the house are busy far away doing business while they don't pay attention to their own property.
Yeah.
What I'm saying here is that the U.S. seems to focus on something in another part of the world, whereas they don't seem to worry about what's happening in their own part of the world. So, this week we saw the escalation of the problems of the Middle East with the retribution or vengeance of the U.S. for the 3 service members that were killed in Jordan. And so the Middle East is now going to take center, be the centerpiece of the media right now. Meanwhile, the back door of the U.S. is essentially wide open, and a crisis of really indescribable proportions could happen in the Middle East, and you don't even know what you're doing at home with your own property. So you're concerned about essentially the property of someone else halfway around the world and what they're doing, and you seem to be oblivious or not interested in protecting your own interests, which, when push comes to shove, is far more important to the average resident of the United States. I won't even say citizen, because I'm not even sure what that means anymore. Let's just say all the residents of the country. And if things don't do well there, the impact of that on their northern neighbor will be just as challenging, because once these systems start to spin out of control, you can't. It's difficult to put them back into synchronicity. In other words, if you focus on something that's far away, and meanwhile at home things are not managed, and they're not being managed from what we can tell, no one has a game plan here that I'm aware of to deal with this.
Well, we played a game of movable goalposts for so long that I don't think anybody really understands what the rules are anyway.
No. And there's been sort of micro events like the beating of those cops in New York this week, and the 4 alleged perps. were all illegals, undocumented, unwelcome, whatever you want to use in New York. They were released on bail and basically buggered off to California, so we were told. And out on no bail was requested, and they're gone. Now, what is the purpose of that? Is that to send a message to the illegal population that you have nothing to fear? Or is that sending a message to the law-abiding citizens that you don't count?
Well, again, the other side of that is that just a state of society that one particular entity, in this case New York, has no more money. And why take these people? We know if we release them, they're going to disappear. And then we don't have to take them to court and have all this money tied up with prosecutors and jurors, and if they are found guilty, putting them in prison, and which costs us money. Is that another aspect of this whole thing? The cynic in me thinks that might be part and parcel what it is.
Well, the cynic in me is that the reason they've done what they've done is that we now focus our attention on the event itself and what happens. And then meanwhile, other things are going on and we're not paying attention to that. So in other words, we focus our attention on this event in New York and how they've just stuck their finger in the air to all the authorities and into the society that supposedly welcomed them in because they're hard-pressed migrants. Turns out they're just petty criminals. But in the meantime, things are going on elsewhere where the impact of those decisions and those events will have far greater significance in these four clowns who should have been thrown in jail. So if for example, and again, we don't know how things will occur in El Paso in Texas with this showdown between federal authorities and states, or in this case Texas, over the border. But this is really unprecedented, and it's going into legal and political territory that I don't think anybody is prepared for in terms of what will be the outcome. There's no winners in this one,
No.
at all.
Well, I think it goes back to what we've talked about before, and are we now being manipulated again, yet again, once more, to look at the left hand because you don't want them to know what our right hand is doing? And it also boils down to now to a catalyst point where if some spark is ignited and one side in this border issue in Texas by accident shoots off a gun somewhere, is that going to open up massive return volleys? God, you would hope not. But
well, let's look at a recent example of what impact the George Floyd issue. Look at the impact that had on the United States. This, if it spins out of control in terms of magnitude, is like a nuclear explosion versus a firecracker. That's how I see the difference. And the stresses and strains within the system and within the population itself, politically and otherwise, is really, really quite evident. And the polarization on this on so many issues is really, really causing people to be concerned. There's a vibe, there's a feeling, there's a it's hard to really come up with term that would.
You're right there, and I think, Tom, too, this comes down to the divisive nature that our politicians have here in Canada in particular, with our individual that's currently in charge of the place. If you don't agree with the policies or that, you become a they.
Yes.
And I don't know how it is in the United States, but looking at it from an outsider, it seems to me like you have a we and a they, on the political levels. Um, and people seem to be more concerned. Well, not people, politicians seem to be more concerned with driving a wedge in than they are trying to unite and lead and guide.
Well, I think the test is very straightforward, is the level of respect that the citizens have for their leadership is rock bottom.
Oh, it is, yeah.
You know,
And I did see something on the flyby news about that one Texas lawmaker now wants to have a bodyguard of TSA people surrounding them when they travel through an airport. Yeah. Well, we've reached a point where your credibility or your aura, your whatever it is that you're wanting, it's not washed anymore. I mean, people are seeing you for what you really could be. You're not the leader. You're in it for yourself. You're I don't know what you're in it for, but it's obviously certainly not for the betterment of the country that I can see.
yeah. Well, I think the disrespect shown towards leadership is inversely proportional to the, I guess, the anger that is building up in the population with regard to how their lives are impacted day to day. And, I guess back to the Groundhog Day sort of analogy, where every day you wake up the same thing all over again. The amount of misinformation that is generated by supposedly the authorities that we're supposed to respect for their principles and their guidance and their interest in our welfare is incredible. Yet they are the first to say that there's too much misinformation out there regarding their intent. Well, this is so Orwellian. We tell you the sky is green when you know it's blue. We tell you things are fine when you know it's not. This is what they seem to be doing, and they kind of relish it. I mean, it's the statistics that come out quarterly or monthly on anything. It's always changed a month later, to not be quite as rosy as they suggested it was going to be. And back in the day, they used to say, if a politician tells you things are doing okay, they're lying. Things aren't doing okay. And so that is more true today than I think than ever was before. And so there's a malaise that I detect, and maybe it's just me, but people are just tired of the same old that these folks have been dishing out. And because time is contracted much differently today than it was 10 years ago because of the media and because of the post-COVID hangover that we've experienced, we were told a lot of things during that period. It turned out to be not true.
Yeah.
And so now they're running around trying to change the narrative on that, or if you ask for information through an freedom of information, you get this redacted stuff back that's just black pages, and you go, what are you doing? And so they really see the twilight of their time, I think, coming. The problem is the mess they've created now. As you say, well, who's coming to clean this up? Because there's doesn't seem to be anybody on the horizon or any group on the horizon. All we have is extremists and polarization. in front of us. And I think that that is what makes us feel the way that we feel, like it's Groundhog Day. Here we go again, you know?
Yeah.
It's,
Well, again, and not to belabor the point, but with the COVID lockdown, if, as perhaps some conspiracy theorists put forward venture, if this was nothing more than a social experiment, I don't think that what's happened was even one of the thought out outcomes of what could possibly go wrong. Right? It's kind of like up here in Canada, right? Hold my beer while I go and drive this truck over a cliff. Because what could possibly go wrong? You know, it's just not been thought out, or if it's been thought out, it's been certainly thought out by a far more wicked mind than what I could dream up. But where's the end game? What is the end game? What is the ultimate goal here? I don't know.
well, we've never experienced the kind of authoritarianism that seems to be prevalent these days. And overarching government interest in everything we do. These are all new phenomena, which
Mhm.
much of which was hatched, I think, during the COVID era. But these folks who supposedly in the leadership class and the elites, they got drunk on the power that they were able to exercise during COVID. And now that that's over, and okay, people are coming. Some people are coming to their senses and are questioning stuff. They don't like that. Okay. They're just not interested in, and they're very afraid of their power base slipping away from them, because this has been a great run, you know, for
Who
them.
was it?
Uh,
Lord Acton, was that, Tom?
yeah, yeah, I know, corrupted totally. That's what these, but you know, it's like you say, the end game is very strange here, because the end game is dark. Um,
It's dark, yes, and I think it's well beyond the control of any one of the political leaders that we currently have or might tend to have leading the country in the future. I don't
well,
see how
you know,
the
it's
snowball turned into an avalanche.
yeah, yeah, and of course, it may well be that that is the end game. Maybe the end game is to break everything up. You know, first you burn it down, then you rebuild it. The thing is that you may be rebuilding something that doesn't even remotely look like what we have now. If you want to
Mhm.
turn Canada and the U.S., which is two countries, into six or seven countries, you're well on your way to doing that, because you know, you're going to have a problem in bringing people to the table who have diametrically opposed views on how a society should function. Okay, and what does the word freedom of the press or freedom of speech mean? It means different things to far leftists than it does to people in the center, or to people to the right of center. We're not even talking about, you know, these other conspiracy nut jobs running around who talk about, you know, the power of the white supremacists and this kind of nonsense. What we got here is strictly a power grab at the regional level, which could essentially prove fatal to the Union and to Confederation. Because unless you have a respected cadre of leadership that can function through by example, transparency and honesty and all those other things, in for the greater interest and prosperity of the whole, these guys will be looking at a requiem for both the Union and Confederation. You'll see five or six different countries. Maybe that's the plan, and maybe this
Maybe.
is, maybe, you know, maybe you want to have distinct regions that become autonomous and might have some combined collective interests for, you know, security. But I mean, if you want to blow it up, this is how to do it. And don't be relying on the old timers, I should say, to come to your rescue, because there's very few of them left to do this.
Mhm.
And so if you disrespect the rules that brought you to power, which is what they're doing, then you're going to have to deal with what the result of that disrespect is. And you know, if you look at very simple places of difference, simple places of difference is what I call it. Quebec is different in Canada from the rest of the country. Alberta is moving that way. California is different than Florida. The Midwest has very little in common in many ways in the U.S. to the Northeast, and so you can see how these things start to spin into different cultural, economic, and social spheres, which may well coexist differently, and perhaps better. I mean, if you want to be in a far left camp, then you're free to move to the country of California. If you want to live in a more libertarian place, and you can pick Omaha and Alberta. The conventional thinking for me is going to be that places that have been by and large unaffected because they've been sitting on the sidelines are the ones that will lose the most. And that's where the places like the industry no longer exists. In Canada, you can see Ontario being a gooey part of this that really won't know where it sets up in this new world order of North America.
Yeah.
Same with some of the Midwest states, and they'll have to come up with some kind of a conglomeration. Clearly, the growth areas in the U.S., which is the southeast, they're going to probably say, well, we're okay, and we'll put up our own fences to make sure that what we've created here in terms of prosperity and peace and security doesn't get impacted by people who want to come down here and change it. So, we're looking at we're just spitballing here at the moment, but you can see how this can end up being very different, and maybe that's what is the plan. We have missed something along the way. Maybe busting this all up is exactly what the powers that be want.
You mean that's what the right hand's been doing all along, and we've been concentrating on the left?
Yeah, possibly.
Well, we're kind of winding down again, and I think we put a lot of ideas out there for people to think about.
And some may be disjointed. I mean, we're just, as I say, we're spitballing here, but it's the groundhog thing is exactly the right analogy. We're just every week we come back, there's still these same problems, and no one seems to be tackling them.
And that's right, because what was this phrase? It used to be when I was working that they were looking for the best and the brightest to go forward and lead the organization. And, the best and the brightest were sitting at a coffee shop going, I don't want to get involved with this. It's a big mess. And maybe that's what we got now. We got a lot of people sitting in the corner knowing that they could do better, that they could have a big following, that they could lead on, but they're just not prepared to do it. Well, I don't know. Time will tell.
Yeah, I do. Well, we'll give another week and we'll come back with more.
And don't be surprised if we come back with another Groundhog Edition.
Take care, Bob.
You too. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, bye.